Okay, let's move on to something that isn't Toy Story. It's something that is a romantic comedy written by Richard Curtis, which scares me.
Yes. Speaking of going back to the well, yesterday sees singer-songwriter Himesh Patel's Jack Malik finally give up on his dreams of success after years of failing to make a splash in a local pub circuit, much to the disappointment of his manager, his ex-girlfriend and now school teacher, Lily James's Ellie Appleton. However, during a mysterious global blackout/glitch in the Matrix, Jack is knocked off his bike by a bus and, on recovering, finds that the world has, somehow, had all knowledge and evidence of the Beatles scrubbed from it. In short, he goes about re-recording as much of their catalogue as he can remember, and while he's still not an overnight success, eventually he turns enough heads to get a supporting gig on the Ed Sheeran tour, lighting a rocket that will propel him to fame and acclaim, and all the trappings that accompany being a massive star these days. But this will take a toll on his personal life and his mental state. Now, there's the odd moment where yesterday looks like it's going to veer into examining something interesting in its premise, and there is promise in that premise. Could presenting songs written 50 to 60 years ago achieve the same level of success in today's very different cultural landscape? How would pop culture have changed, having removed one of the biggest influences on pop and rock? Can someone really connect to an audience recreating some songs that were fairly personal to Lennon and McCartney? Can you pluck songs from the very different eras of the Beatles' career arc and present them together without sounding like you have multiple personality disorder? How has the nature of music creation, production and fandom changed since the 60s, and would that make a difference to how the work is received? Can you manage a more blatant product placement of Pepsi? Tellingly for modern cinema, the only question out of those that yesterday seems interested in answering is about product placement. There's a few half-hearted lunges at some others, but they're so underdeveloped that I kind of wish they hadn't bothered. Sure, as the brothers Gallagher admitted yonks ago, if there's no Beatles, there's no Oasis, but there's also apparently no other impact on other recording artists or entire genres or wider culture in general that's worth exploring or, well, even mentioning. Now, I'm perhaps not as annoyed by the waste of the premise as I might have been, because I paid attention at the one part that mattered in the trailer, that part where it says, written by Richard Curtis, and I knew exactly what bill of goods I was being sold. Is a slight variation on the same trite romance he's been rewriting since Four Weddings and a Funeral, hung from a slightly different scaffolding. I mean, this is a guy that can take a film that is nominally about a guy that has a time-travelling cupboard and turn it into the same trite romance that he's been writing since Four Weddings and a Funeral.
I wonder if you're going to mention that. Yeah. You've been quite salty about that film back in 1 days.
Aye, so does this romance work? Yeah. The problem is that Jack Malik, or if we're being a bit less charitable, Himesh Patel, not only isn't the most dynamic band frontman or screen premise, he's barely a character at all, and quite what Ellie would see in this sack of unmixed concrete is, at any point, let alone years later, is entirely beyond me. The other main axis his character is exploring is the toll taken by passing off someone else's work as his own, and the perhaps warranted imposter syndrome that provokes. Now, to be scrupulously fair, Patel is much better at getting that across, culminating in a version of Help that does actually sound like someone dealing with an existential crisis. The film's supporting characters don't quite get the material they need to provide support, unfortunately, but through no real fault of the actors. Lily James is likeable, but their pre-existing relationship isn't all that well explored enough to have much emotional impact when it changes as the story progresses, and as that's the main string to this film's bow, it can't help but misfire. The comic support fares a little better, with another spiky Kate McKinnon turn and Joel Fry's gormless roadie Rocky raising a few laughs. It's also great to see UK comic TV mainstays Sanjeev Bhaskar and Meera Syal on the big screen as Malik's parents. And now, for his faults, Curtis still knows how to craft a funny line, and Danny Boyle has his best production hat on, so you're never that far away from a rendition of a great tune, so it is not completely insufferable. In fact, I enjoyed this much more than I expected. But, as I expected to loathe it, that's not exactly the most glowing recommendation now, is it? Sadly, a bit of the waste of the no doubt millions it cost to license the songs. Yes, as I say, not as bad as I feared, and if you stumble across it, it's a diverting enough way to spend a couple of hours in a way that whatever that time-travelling one was, which I can't quite remember the name of, that very much wasn't. This is perfectly acceptable entertainment, but not really much more than that, and yes, it is a complete waste of, on the surface, seemed to be a good idea that you could do a bit of exploring in, and it's more or less ignored all of that, which is a bit of a shame. Yes, not bad, but could have been so much better.
What was that film? Was it called About Time?
That's the one, yes.
Yeah. Domhnall Gleeson, eh?
Yeah.
Which I haven't watched because, you very much turned me off. Not I was likely to be honest, but you very much turned me off of that one. I've not even seen the the trailer for this, I was, this will sound weird, but I was somewhat put off by the posters though, because every time I walk past the stands in the cinema, the guy, whose name I wasn't actually paying enough attention to remember there, sorry.
Himesh Patel?
Himesh Patel, thank you. He bore more than a passing resemblance to Lewis Hamilton as far as I was concerned. So, and Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest drivers of all time, but I can't stand him. He's an asshat. So that turned me off, which was absolutely nothing to do with him or the film. But no, but most of it was like, hey, I love the Beatles. I like Danny Boyle, but Richard Curtis.
Yes.
Which is why I didn't bother trying to get to this, and I probably won't.
No, it's not really worth making an effort to see. If you stumble across it, if it happens across you, it's not terrible. But yeah, can't really give it much of a glowing recommendation. There's certainly better films to watch, well, in general, but not even just at the cinema at the moment.
I'm trying to think now if I've seen anything by Richard Curtis that I like, and I'm coming up with a blank. I don't like Blackadder. I don't think it's very good.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. In that case, I suspect you probably would not like this at all, then. Yeah.
I mean, there are bits and pieces of Blackadder, like... Actually, that's not fair. Maybe it's just the first Blackadder I'm not that fond of. The 2 and 3 actually aren't too bad. So maybe, yeah, there's something. And Vicar Dibley's just really generic. I mean, like, there's sort of vaguely amusing bits, but then they just keep repeating the same jokes over and over and over. And then anything film-wise, particularly things like Four Weddings at the Funeral and Love Actually, it's like, nah, these are all terrible.
Yeah.
Love Actually is particularly offensive. It's just if you watch that again with any sort of critical eye, particularly in terms of way... Basically, it's back to our Kieślowski thing. It's creepy bastard wish fulfillment.
Yes.
There's a lot of creepy stuff in that film.
Absolutely, yeah.
As well as the fact that also that film is everyone that has ever existed, I think, is the approximate number of characters.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's the Richard Curtis angle that's turning me off, because I like Danny Boyle. I've seen so many of his films that I've really enjoyed. Yeah, and then to actually squander what could be a really interesting premise if you take away a cultural touchstone.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't get into it at all, really.
Yeah, what a waste.
Barely touches it, a bit of a waste, yeah.
That's a real pity. So yeah, there's an interesting idea in there. Not just like the sort of the morality of the lying and stuff or anything like that. The other things you said, it's got like the idea of like the relevance of older music, but also when that has just been completely taken out of like all the decades of people building on that. Yeah. Whether like there may be an artist who's absolutely no idea they're influenced by the Beatles, but they are, because they're influenced by a band who's influenced by a band who was influenced by the Beatles. You know, so there's so much. I mean, it wouldn't be easy to write, I think, because you'd have to do a really strong bit of world building for that to really work. Yeah. But it sounds like, from what you're saying, they didn't bother at all. No,
it is literally like they've just surgically cut out the Beatles catalogue and had that exist in isolation from everyone else. And I mean, yes, I get it. It would be incredibly speculative to come up with any of that, but isn't that kind of the point? If you're going to do something like this, isn't that what you're looking for? Or if you are going to do it that way, you need to give some kind of credence as to how if you just rocked up with the Beatles catalogue now and started singing it now, there aren't that many songs written 50 to 60 years ago that you can present these days and people would just go, yes, this is clearly a fantastic tune and I'm on board with this. Without, culture has moved on. Hip hop wasn't really a thing when the Beatles were about, but they kind of are now. Hip hop has influenced pretty much everything, and the way it's kind of presented here doesn't reflect any of that at all. So any cultural changes that's happened since 1560s has not really been taken any cognizance of in the way that this is presented. But everyone just goes, oh, well, obviously these are the best musical things that have ever happened, and eat them up as you would have done back in the 60s as the Beatlemania sort of happened again. And so even that aspect of it doesn't get properly examined. It's just a waste of the premise, really.
I mean, the Beatles tried so many different genres too, and in the remarkably short time the Beatles were together, the music changed phenomenally. I don't think any other band has changed quite so much, certainly not in such a short time.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't just imagine in 2019 you could suddenly rock up singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and expect people to get behind it.
Yeah.
It just sounds archaic.
Yes, and parts of it does. It's a weird and frustrating film where the premise has been underserved, and really, when you strip the premise away from it, it's just the same romance story that he's been writing for forever. If you take away the sort of sci-fi gimmick of removing the Beatles and all the kind of alternate reality sort of things that is trying to get into, it is just the story of someone becoming successful and losing their roots, and the exact same story you've seen several million times before by this point. It's Danny Boyle, so it's really well done, and it's all very slickly produced and all that, and it's enjoyable, but there's nothing new about it when you strip away the one thing that is new, but just they haven't bothered exploring fully, which is a bit frustrating, really.
That's a shame. Sounds like if you want to watch some sort of romantic comedy that's based on music, you should just watch Once instead, because it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not really connected to that, just because I'm thinking of sort of films with sort of romantic bits in them with music, and I thought about Once, and Once is just a great film. So yeah, watch that instead, and don't give Richard Curtis any adulation.
Yeah, or 9 songs.
No, Scott. Scott, you're a bad Scott.